You are in the Faulkner Focus. Iran launched more attacks against our allies in the region this morning. Our partners, our friends, the Abraham Accords, those people who are with us. Kuwait, Bahrain on the list of people who are taking incoming now. Their militaries are trying to intercept the attacks coming from Iran. Why there? Well, they can't reach much else, but they can reach their neighbors still. And while the United States escalates its strikes on Iran for the 10th straight night last night, the latest wave comes after the death of 3 American soldiers during those Iranian attacks. The president posted, every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over. A former Trump administration official here.
The Iranians have consistently now targeted American soldiers as far afield as Jordan. They're targeting American bases. The president's going to hit back, and he's going to hit back hard. I think that right now the American people are interested in trying to find a way to protect the men and women who are over there, to protect our assets in the region, but to bring this conflict to the type of conclusion that the president and the vice president were looking for when they signed the MOU that Iran has not honored.
The MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, seems so far, and that was just a few days ago. Iran reneged again. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub will be with me in moments. I want to start off with Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst in the Middle East. Well, look, Trey, this affects every country in that region at this point, with Iran just doing what Iran does.
Yeah, Harris, good morning. Absolutely. As recently as last hour, the Iranians were launching new attacks against U.S. allies, including Kuwait and Bahrain, sirens sounding there. And the Jordanians say they shot down at least 5 incoming Iranian drones earlier today. This does follow a heavy night of U.S. strikes against Iran, the 10th consecutive night aimed at reducing Iran's ability to threaten vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command released a statement saying since early May, CENTCOM forces have helped facilitate the transit of approximately 900 commercial vessels and 450 million barrels of crude oil. They went on to say American forces remain postured and prepared to hold Iran accountable for unwarranted aggression towards civilian mariners seeking to freely and openly transit the strait. Early this morning, Iran attacked another tanker off the coast of Oman, forcing the crew to evacuate, according to a maritime tracking group. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson was asked this week about the possibility of U.S. forces entering Iran. This was his response.
They will face the consequences. I believe there are people in those very areas, and they are not few in number, who are counting the moments until they can welcome them.
The comments come as we're also tracking developments related to Lebanon. The pilot program between Israel and Lebanon is now underway. In at least one Lebanese village, the IDF has withdrawn to allow Lebanese forces to take over. This is part of a joint effort to reduce the influence of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Now, today, President Trump will meet with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun at the White House. The pair are scheduled to discuss the normalization with Israel and efforts to disarm Hezbollah. Harris?
Trey, thank you very much. Let's welcome in now retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub, served as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot and a battalion commander. Lieutenant Colonel Gaub, right now, Pickaxe Mountain is front and center. I mean, if we know that Iran is moving nuclear material there, what does that inform us of exactly?
Well, Harris, the first thing it informs us of is that Iran's not going to give up on the nuclear ambitions, and they never intended to. And so that's going to put Pickaxe Mountain right in the middle of the circle for future targeting. I would imagine that would come fairly soon once the intelligence is confirmed and the capabilities that we have are called upon and able to accomplish the mission of, if not necessarily penetrating fully into the mountain, at least enough to make sure that they can't keep using it like that. So I imagine you'll see something regarding that fairly soon once we know exactly what we're dealing with.
Well, look, I am curious to know just about the positioning of what some of these would-be targets. Is that far from the city of Tehran, their capital? I mean, because it seems like now everything is on the table. If we go into full-scale war, you know it is.
Yeah, everything's on the table, and frankly, from the perspective of distance, Pickaxe Mountain is not far from Tehran in general, and but neither is anything in Tehran or in Iran in general right now either. It's when you look at how we're trying to isolate the strait, specifically with these 10 days of targeting over very recently, of course, then we're going to try to do potentially the same thing with Iran in general, from the specifically the eastern and northern border, with some of these bridges that go into allied countries or supporting countries that they're using as backup logistics means, as they've lost their ability to use the strait so much. So I would expect you're going to see an expansion of this to very specific and high impact military targets nationwide.
Let's talk about expansion from Iran's point of view. They're going to use their terrorist proxies, and one of them would be the group of Houthis in Yemen. And they already are working to cut off Saudi Arabia's point at a key strait there and key waterway there, so that they can't get ships in and out. Look, that was kind of the go-around for many countries per, access to Saudi Arabia to get oil. What does that mean?
Well, ultimately, is Iran sticking to its ultimate and larger vision that it's had for decades, which is the ability to dominate everything through Shia fundamentals in terrorism, from Tehran through Baghdad to Damascus and into Lebanon itself, and then move south to be able to control those critical waterways. This is them trying to do that through the Houthis, even while they've lost a lot of ground in Iraq and Syria, and right now potentially even Lebanon.
Lieutenant Colonel Gaub, I'm going to cut in with breaking news. Please stand by for me. The President of the United States welcoming the President of Lebanon. This is Joseph Aoun. He is there to talk about the situation that's affecting his neighbor, Iran to the north, and to the south, Israel. And who's controlling that now? Israel versus Hezbollah. Run, owned, operated by Iran. Can these two men come to an agreement where Lebanon's military has more support and they can take back their country from the hands of terrorists? It's crushing their economic situation right now because people are focused. Let's listen. I'm going to ask our team to roll that back, and in a moment we will play what the president said. I talked over it inadvertently, and we need to know what that was. So bad on me. We're going to show it to you as soon as we can. I'm going to bring back now the Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub to talk a little bit about the importance of this relationship. If Lebanon can get hold of its military and take back territory and crush the capabilities of Hezbollah, how does that change the game?
Changes the Middle East significantly. Hezbollah has always been the bookend of what Tehran was trying to do to reach specifically the Mediterranean and plant themselves on the northern border of Israel with a fundamentalist Shia group that they controlled. And we're talking about a militia that is 100,000 or so in strength and gained a lot of strength since they were freed up just prior to the Gulf War in 1991, when Syria invaded and basically planted Hezbollah there. So Trump, in meeting President Aoun, by the way, who's the only Christian leader in the Middle East right now, or of a country, is a significant conversation. One, can Israel withdraw from the south, and can Lebanon then take that vacuum, that power vacuum, and fill it rather than let Hezbollah do it? And if they can't do it on their own, what do they need to accomplish that? And frankly, the French should be part of this, because they're the ones who've had the mandate in Lebanon for many, many years. They should be very interested in watching this as well. But there's a potential here for a significant change in the Middle East in general.
The Israeli ambassador to the United States, who is heading up the negotiations, was on Fox last hour. Let's watch a little bit of that.
We want to withdraw from Lebanon as soon as we can. We're there not because we have territorial ambitions, but we're there in order to protect our northern border so that Hezbollah will not come storming across the border as Hamas did on October 7th and slaughter our civilians or fire missiles into our towns and villages.
Your reaction?
Yeah, this is exactly what you would expect of Israel, especially if they know that there's a plan in place to actually fill that space with a friendly element from Lebanon, rather than what typically happens is Israel withdraw, Hezbollah moves back in, and then ultimately nothing changes. We go back to what it always was. That's the significant change that can happen as a result of this. And I think Israel is right to not have territorial ambitions, just security ambitions. And this ties into what they've also occupied in a little bit of southern Syria as well. And if you can put that together, what you've got is a much more secure ally in Israel.
You know, it's interesting. I wrote down what you said. Israel cannot have territorial ambitions in all of this in order for this to work. I hear a little bit of warning or caution toward Israel with that. How problematic has that been?
Well, it's always been problematic because it's used as an excuse by the nations around them as a bit of a hammer against Israel. They're just going to call them an imperialist power and try to, put them back in their box per se. And so I'm not saying that Israel shouldn't look to secure their own borders, but expansionism with Israel has always been a challenge too, because as I said, other nations will keep using that. But I don't think Israel wants to necessarily expand where they live right now. They just want to be left alone in a secure environment to live in what they already own.
Yeah, not having their neighbors lob bombs and missiles and things into their country. So we have rolled back the tape on the president. This is a bit hard to hear. One of the reasons why I couldn't really hear him talking when I was talking. But let's watch, because I want the audience to listen up and see the president greeting the president of Lebanon in the context of, can we get a deal to have Lebanon's military take over control from Hezbollah, the terrorist army? Let's watch. So the president saying there, Lieutenant Colonel Gaub, that obviously welcoming the president from Lebanon. Very good to have him here, very respected. I'm quoting him there. And we expect to get a lot of progress. Talk to me about short-term progress, because controlling Hezbollah is a long-term goal. I mean, the military is not control of the southern part of Lebanon, the government military.
Oh, absolutely. Hezbollah is not a short-term problem. It's been, frankly, 36 years or so in building its strength where it's at that you're not going to fix within a few months.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.